In this video, I'm going to talk about powers of I. So we know that I is just our symbol for the square root of -1. So what happens if we take like I squared, for example? Well, that's the square root of -1 squared. And what do we know about when you take the square root of something and then you square it? Those two things cancel out, so it's just -1. So that's I squared. What happens if you take I cubed? Well, here we have the square root of -1 cubed. And remember the powers, the rules about exponents, we know that we can split this up into the square root of -1 squared times the square root of -1. We know that the square root of -1 squared is just -1. So we have -1 times the square root of -1. So we can write that as -I. I to the fourth power, we can write this as the square root of -1 to the fourth, which if we use our rules about exponents, we can also write that as square root of -1 squared times the square root of -1 squared. Because if you multiply something with the same base with exponents, then you just add the exponents. So square root of -1 squared times the square root of -1 squared is going to be the same as the square root of -1 to the fourth power. So square root of -1 squared was -1, so we have -1 times -1, which is 1. So I to the fourth power is 1. Now let's try I to the fifth power. Well, really what we can do is it's the same as this is the same as I to the fourth times I to the first. Because if we just add the exponents, 4 plus 1 is 5. So these are the same thing. These mean the same thing. So we know I to the fourth is 1. So this is the same as 1 times I to the first, which is just I. I to the sixth is the same as I to the fifth times I. We just figured out I to the fifth is the same as I. So this is I times I. And we know I times I is I squared. And we know I squared is -1. I to the seventh is the same as I to the sixth, which we just figured out is -1 times I to the first. So this is -1 times I. So it's just -I. And then I to the eighth power, same idea, it's going to be I to the seventh times I. And we know I to the seventh is -I, so we have -I times I. Or if you think about it as, it's kind of easier if you think about it as I to the, let's see, I to the fifth times I to the third, which I guess is still I times -I. But then if we have, remember I times I is I squared. So we have negative outside the parentheses, I squared. That gives us -1. So that's 1. So what you'll notice is that there's a pattern. So we have I, and then we have -1 is I squared, then we have -I, 1. I, -1, I, 1. So it repeats that cycle every 4 times. So every 4 we go up in exponent, it's going to cycle through this I, -1, I, 1 pattern. So what you'll notice is that every multiple of 4 is 1. So I to the 4th was 1, and I to the 8th was 1. So, and then if you do like I to the 12th, that's also going to be 1. I to the 16th is going to be 1. So every multiple of 4, so if I is to an exponent, that's a multiple of 4, it's going to be 1. And some people have asked me, like, well, what if it's also a multiple of 2? Well, any multiple of 4 is also a multiple of 2. So just think about, is it a multiple of 4, yes or no? So basically, we can use this cycle to sort of shortcut to solve, like, what's I to the 38th, for example, was one question in your packet. So if we have I to the 38th, well, what we want to do is figure out how many times does it cycle through. Well, really, it doesn't matter how many times it cycles through, but it's going to cycle through the I, -1, I, 1. It's going to cycle through that, and then there's going to be some left over after it cycles through a certain number of times. So we want to figure out, well, we know 38 is not a multiple of 4. But if you divide 38 by 4, you're going to get, let's see, 9, and then remainder 2. Because 4 times 9 is 36. So if you divide 38 by 4, you're going to get 9 with 2 left over. So we don't really care about the 9, we just care about the remainder 2. So what this is telling us is that it's going to cycle through the cycle 4 times, or not 4 times, sorry, 9 times. It's going to cycle through 9 times, and then there's going to be 2 left over after it completes the cycle. So it's going to get back to 1, and then it's going to have 2 more i's left over. So this is the same as I squared. And we know I squared is -1. So we can do another example. So we can do this with really any number. We could do I to the, let's see, 86. Let's figure out if 86 is divisible by 4. Let's see, goes in twice. And then, all right, so we're going to have 21 remainder 2 again. So remember, this just means that it's going to cycle through 21 times. We don't really care about how many times it goes through the cycle. What we really care about is what's left over after it goes through the cycle as many times as it can. So our remainder 2 means that this is I squared, which is -1. What about, let's do I to the 93. Well, first let's figure out what's 93 divided by 4. And really, when I'm doing this, I just care what the remainder is. I don't really care what my full answer is. But I do this to figure out what the remainder is. So let's see. We have 2. 13 is going to be 3. Remainder 1. So we're going to have a remainder 1. So this is going to be the same as I to the first power, which is just I. Let's do another one. Let's try I to the, 73. Yeah. So we want to divide by 4, see what we get. Let's see. We get 18, remainder 1. So that means that this is the same as I, the first power, which is just I. Let's do one more. Let's try I to the, let's see, 43. So we pretty much know just by looking at this, if you divide 43 by 4, you're going to get 10, remainder 3. 4 times 10 is 40, and you have 3 left over. So this is going to be the same as I to the third power, which was negative I. So the idea here with dividing by 4 is just seeing how many times it's going to go through that cycle and end up back at 1. So when it ends up back at 1, then we don't really care what we're multiplying. We just care what is left after we multiply by 1, because multiplying by 1 doesn't change anything, right? So we just want to know what's left over after we multiply by 1. And that's the idea behind this cycle. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. The idea is just that you understand how to multiply like I times I. Obviously, I times I is going to be negative 1 because we cancel out the square roots and so on. So if you can remember that, then this should be pretty straightforward. I just hope that you guys conceptually actually understand why we're dividing by 4 and aren't just kind of dividing by 4 just because I tell you to. So hopefully you actually kind of get why this process works, and hopefully that helps you understand I a little bit better. And I'll see you in the next video.